from the Psych Hub Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Burnout Antidote, infusing well-being into healthcare culture. I'm Amy Pearlman, and I'm joined today by my favorite co-host here,
Paul Dager. Thanks, Amy. Right back at you.
And we are here today to talk about experiencing a mental illness as a healthcare provider.
You know, and it's funny because as I read this title, I think it should be experiencing mental illness as a human who provides healthcare, because, ultimately that's, I think, what we're talking about.
That's where I was about to go, that I said something around this title just doesn't feel right to me as we jump into it.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to throw some stats at you on this topic. And so looking at healthcare clinicians, we do have a higher incidence of different types of mental conditions, including anxiety and depression and PTSD. And I found it fascinating that physicians are twice as likely to report their mental health as poor. But the flip side is we're less likely to report it because of all the stigma. And so it's really, we're more likely to have these conditions due to exposure to all the trauma and stress and systemic issues of healthcare environments. And we're less likely to say something and get help.
And I think I'll bring in, as much as you like to bring the stats and define the items, I really like to talk about the stigma that exists and what these numbers look like. And in the research, we looked, it's always a range around how much these incidents are of mental illness in the healthcare population, because we may say our mental health is poor, but we are less likely to go and access treatment and put it on a claim.
Right.
And these health insurance claims are what tends to give us the data back. So we end up with kind of fuzzy math around what the incidences of our mental health are, or mental illness are, in the healthcare clinician population. I also think
Well, I was going to say this idea, it was common humanity of, if you're experiencing anxiety or depression or trauma symptoms, my takeaway from the fuzzy numbers are you're not alone. Most likely your colleagues are in the same boat, that this is something we're experiencing together.
I think that's true. And I also wanted to bring up that the numbers may be fuzzier also because many healthcare clinicians don't feel safe to access mental health treatment through their insurance. And several people choose to pay out of pocket, which is an additional cost for them, but also maybe an additional protection or privacy for them as well. So I see the stigma. I see how it affects the numbers. And I also see what that struggle may be financially, emotionally, or just in terms of our general health.
Which makes me want to honor all the more the courage of our two clinicians who chose to share their stories today, to give us some insight, firsthand experience of what is it like to be helping others and suffering as well. What's it like to be helping others and experiencing mental health conditions at the same time?
Let's listen to their stories.
All right.
In nursing, it's possible to get burned out in a nursing job and then move on to one that's more mellow or something that you can handle, and sometimes you can switch back and forth. I was working in a clinic, and then I decided that I wanted to try something different, so I entered a training program in the operating room. After 6 months, I got assigned to night shift from 9 o'clock at night, 7 in the morning, emergencies and traumas. It was certainly exciting in the very beginning. It was scary. It was, all of these things. We did some amazing things. We saved lives. But it's kind of like if you happen to be an ambulance driver going out on calls, you can't unsee the things that you see, and it's accumulative. The difference is the EMTs would bring them in, and we could actually do things. And a lot of times we would save people's lives, and that was an amazing thing. But sometimes you couldn't. And those things are traumatic and they're gut-wrenching. And the last thing the person probably heard was you, as they were put to sleep, to start the procedure, telling them they were going to be okay, and then they weren't. And that kind of always bothered me. And so the amazing thing is that you can be successful, but the pain and the horror is cumulative. And so I started having panic attacks. I did this for 4 years, and after 3.5 years, I started having panic attacks. And I was able to talk to my charge nurse, and she was great. She understood I had to get another job. It took me 2 months. She covered for me when she could and supported me when, because of staffing issues, I had to jump in and had to do what had to be done. But I still remember the situations that I would love to tell you, but it would make me sound crazy. They were horrible, horrible things. And this is accumulative. It does build up. And so it's something that, and I don't know how the other nurses did it for 10 years or 20 years or whatever, but I was done. I eventually got a job as a liver transplant coordinator and finished out the last 10 years of my career successfully doing that. And it had its own stresses, but they were different and they were manageable. So I just wish the public understood the cost to the nursing profession to do what we do. I'm proud of the people we saved, but I'll always carry that pain of the people that we couldn't.
My name is Anna. I'm from Bogota, Universidad del Rosario, graduate doctor. When I was 21 years old, one of my colleagues died. One of my best friends, in fact. He died in a motorcycle accident. It was not expected. And when I received the news after that, basically, I just could not sleep, could not concentrate. I was having issues even eating, and I had suicidal thoughts. This was not the first time I had suicidal thoughts, but this time it was completely different because there was not only thoughts, but ideation and planning to commit it. So I wrote a letter to my parents. That night, my dad made sure that I was not left alone. And the next morning, he was there in the front door of the university. And he was, hey, we are going home. I did not understand at that moment what was going on. But basically, I had to take the decision of suspending my career and going back home. There, next day, I got a meeting with my psychiatrist. That it's been my psychiatrist for 11 years. And we started everything, and I discovered that I was going through a major depression. But besides that, I was borderline. Also personality, bipolar type 2. That completely changed my mind. I was at a resting place, let's say like this, for almost 1 year away from med school. But after that, doing therapy, having meds, in this case, paroxetine is the medication I take right now. But most of it, having the support system allowed me to went back to med school. After going back to med school, my grades improved a lot. Everything changed. I had the support of my colleagues, also of my teachers. But the most important thing was that once I was at the hospital, I discovered that that was my happy place. That was the place that, even though a lot of people might think anxiety will explode, no. For me, it was like a completely different, and it is a completely different experience. With all of this being said, I've learned during this period of almost 11 years with the diagnosis of bipolar type 2, borderline personality, major depression. When you have a good support in your family, when you have a psychiatrist, and when you are willing to do a change for you, everything will be different. Right now, I'm being able to accomplish my dreams. Did my mental health issues stop me from doing? No, no, not at all. In fact, I have learned that it's just a chronic disease, just like diabetes. You have to take care of your sugar during diabetes. Well, mental health, you need to know which are the triggers and take care of it. For example, if you know that alcohol is not going to help you, you just don't drink alcohol and you just avoid all those triggers. And with therapy, it's really important for you to start doing like a critical analysis of how you start dealing with things. It's been a huge process, but it has not stopped me from graduating from med school, which was my main goal because I'm passionate about it. Coming here to the States, living by myself in a completely different country, and preparing for new things, And also, it helped me learning about myself and my mental health helped me to understand better situations that family members go through, that patients go through. It's more about empathy than anything else. And there's no limitation at all. I think that the most important thing is to look up for help. I know a lot of people that go through situations with mental health in med school. Some of them are afraid of being pointed out, but what I have seen, at least in my case, I was lucky enough that instead of being rejected, I had an incredible support from my teachers, from some colleagues. Others didn't understand, but that's okay. You do not expect everyone to understand. Patients, even though I don't tell my patients my diagnosis, but it's important for approaching them and being a better doctor. First, you are a human being, and then you are a doctor.
Amy, this may seem like a strange word, but this is what came to mind when I heard both of these stories is these are success stories in a way, because I'm hearing that while both of these individuals, um, for different reasons, experienced mental health symptoms, they both reached out for support and that support was responded to. And as we were already talking with the lead in, that's not the case typically. And so that's where I felt some sense of one, I'm glad to hear that both these folks took action and that depression and panic attacks are treatable. And that the fact that they were responded to by their colleagues, their supervisors in such a positive way, we just got to replicate this everywhere in other healthcare environments.
I love that. It brings about what are all of the strengths that happened to these individuals with these individuals,
Yeah.
and also what are the strengths of the system in terms of what worked.
How the system can actually make a positive difference instead of a negative one.
I agree. The quote that stood out to me was first you are a human being and then you are a
Yeah.
doctor. And that
Yeah.
stood out for several reasons. But in your reaction, it made me think about how we want the system to work for all human beings, not just doctors or not just healthcare clinicians who are the ones who are supposed to know how it works. And secret,
Right.
it doesn't always work even for us.
Yeah.
In this
Good point.
situation, it did. But I also think about what these healthcare clinicians could bring from their experiences into the greater humanity of how they are as clinicians and how they are as colleagues.
Well, yeah, the wounded healer idea that I am all the more honoring of your suffering when I've been through it myself. You just give me a flashback to grad school, which was a really long time ago, back when they had blackboards. So now you know how long ago it was, or a chalkboard. And I remember this one teacher drew two circles up on the board. one circle was you as a human being, the other circle was you as a counselor. And he said these two circles should never completely overlap to make it in this work, that there is some overlap, that, you know, you bring your humanness into the work, but if your whole identity becomes I am a counselor, or I am a healthcare clinician, that really sets you up for a lot of unnecessary self-inflicted pain and suffering here. And so that it's okay to be human, and part of being human is I may have some depression, I may have some anxiety, and I need help.
And I may be biased on this one because I am a mental health clinician myself, but I tend to think about mental health as a spectrum as opposed to this
Okay, yeah,
idea of mental illness. I think of mental health
yeah,
as a series of coping strategies of kind of what triggers us and what
mm-hmm,
brings up different symptoms, and
mm-hmm,
then also what do we have in our reserves, and what do we have in our toolbox, and what do we have in our biology to
yeah,
respond when those symptoms come up. So I'm not a huge fan of
important.
labels, which people may have recognized by now and may not, but I
Mm-hmm,
do think that sometimes symptoms can be helpful because a label can sometimes give you a solution or a
mm-hmm,
suggested answer. But I
mm-hmm.
don't think any of these strategies are exclusionary to people who don't have a mental health diagnosis that's
Agreed,
kind of
yeah.
more acute on the spectrum.
Well, yeah, it's kind of the both ends of it, isn't it? That I think it's important to recognize if something has crossed a threshold in severity where it is impairing functioning and well-being, to be able to name it. And at the same time, it doesn't have to, you don't have to wait till it's that severe to take action. So I think really that continuum is a healthy way to look at this.
I love a good continuum.
You know, there's something else that I heard in the second story that stood out to me, is this idea of there's so many different types of healthcare settings, and identifying individual fit for, not fit like fitness, but kind of matching. What's a good match for me? And how that second nurse recognized that the trauma OR, while there was some fascination and really good work done, ultimately it wasn't a good fit. And I think back to, like, I used to like working in the ER, and I remember seeing clinicians who it wasn't a good fit for them. And that it's okay that, you know, you're no less of a clinician if you're working someplace like, you know what, this doesn't exactly match with my strengths. And that maybe there's another place, like, you don't have to tough it out. There may be a better fit where you can be of better service, for lack of a better term.
I also think that that fit or that match may change over time based on
True.
what
Yeah,
is
yeah.
going on in that circle of who am I as a human being. And
Yeah.
before I was a mother, I really
Mm-hmm.
liked to travel a lot for work. I
Mm-hmm.
tend to do mobile services, see people in their home, and that got really tiring. It
Yeah.
got tiring to be a parent, and got tiring. I mean, that's a whole other podcast for you on parenting, but
Right.
what I needed from work and what felt right to
Mm-hmm.
me from work
Mm-hmm.
changed as my life changed as well.
Well, and tying those two things together, I begin to think about mental health symptoms can become insightful information, and that maybe my current workplace or environment, something about it is not a good match, and I need to do something, whether that's, you know, taking care of myself with getting some therapy and some medication, or it's recognizing maybe it's time for me to look at a different environment. So taking some of the stigma away from the symptoms are negative, a weakness on my part, to what is this informing me of? Like that second gentleman, that the panic attacks became information around this environment, while I'm effective, is not the best fit for me.
I like to think of it in terms of when you go for a job and they say you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you.
Yeah.
I think about that in terms of maybe it's performance management, or you go and you do your annual review and you think
Mm-hmm.
about how are you at meeting your goals, but how is your workplace doing at
Mm-hmm.
supporting you and meeting your goals, or really supporting the healthcare system that you want to work in.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna pull the curtain back to our listeners. I do have notes from the stories, and as I look at my notes, I have one word circled in red of increased empathy from our first story. So I want to make sure I speak to what touched me there as well. And that what I heard in that second story is this gentleman fully honored his needs around depression and bipolar and borderline disorder. He found he can be more empathetic with his patients. And this idea of being imperfectly human, I'm going all the way back to episode 1 and Dear Tekla. I know we should get, $1 or pay her $1 every time we mention her
The
name.
Tekla jar.
But yeah, that idea of imperfectly human. And I'm going to come back to my two circles, that this recognition that when we fully honor our humanness, then we can begin to move past the stigma that comes up with mental health, and how if I am imperfectly human, I can honor that in my patients as well.
And this brings up mirror neurons to me to some extent.
Yes.
So nice segue into talking about that some. But this idea of how we bring that self-compassion and who we are as human
Mm-hmm.
beings, and we bring that to relationships, it really does think about how we respond to ourselves and vice versa.
I hear an invitation of a practice here. What do you got brewing over there?
So one of the things that I thought about during this, while listening to these stories, was
Yeah.
thinking about, and maybe we'll use the example of our colleague with panic attacks that you just mentioned as well,
Yeah.
but really listening for our mirror neurons in that story, thinking about what would
Mm.
that mean? How does it make you feel? What are the reactions that come up for you? How would
Mm-hmm.
you have advised him if he were your colleague or your friend to respond in
Mm.
his situation, or how he did
Mm-hmm.
respond? What are the things that you could do to support that person?
Okay, I like that. I'm going to do my add-on.
Good.
Because as I think about this and the effect of mirror neurons, and the idea of resonating with someone else's experience, that if I see a colleague start to have a panic attack or some sort of um, impairment of functioning, I may resonate and start to feel fear, like, well, what that happens to me. And so I want to recognize that with the mirror neurons, there's a whole range of possibilities of experience and bringing in kindness to self for whatever shows up.
And that is very real. All of the reactions that come
Yeah.
up, they're all practice within ourselves. And
Yeah.
one of the things I enjoy about this podcast is hearing stories from other people that allow us to
Mm-hmm.
practice what is going on within ourselves as we hear these
Mm-hmm.
stories. And what is it that I find personally that my sense of compassion for others is
Yeah.
sometimes stronger than my self compassion. So, the
Very
last
true.
part of
Yeah.
this practice or this exercise that I would take away is the reaction that I have of whether it is kindness, whether it is strength, whether it is giving freedom, or kind of pushing through that stigma to get the help that we need, or if it is
Mm-hmm.
fear, how do we work
Mm-hmm.
through what that means for ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
How can we bring a little bit of that to our humanity so that we have a common humanity out there?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, bringing the human into the healthcare culture. And so that's what I'm hearing you describe, is so we can show up fully human in all the different meanings that has, is only going to enhance not only the healing that we provide to others, but
Join
the
us
healing we
next
provide to
week as we
ourselves and our
talk
colleagues
more
too.
about how to bring more of that humanness or humanity,
And it's all
I guess is the
practice.
right
You
word,
don't have to do it all at
into
once.
Mm-hmm.
healthcare. And we
real
talk about
perfection and
healthcare
just practice.
clinicians living with a physical or mental disability.
Yeah, looking forward to exploring that topic with you next time, Amy.
Thanks, Paul. See you next week. If you'd like to reach us, you can do so at podcast@psychhub.com. To be notified of new episodes, don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow wherever you're listening. And reviews are so helpful, so please do leave one if you can. It allows others to find us and to join along. The Burnout Antidote is executive produced and edited by Jacob Morrison. Research is assisted by Tekla Ross. Show artwork was created by Ornella Jangoli and Ashton Smith. A very special thanks to Juliana Castro, Alyssa Fackler, Trevin Stiegel, Andrea Womack, and of course, our pet, Pickles. The Burnout Antidote is a co-production from Psych Hub and is brought to you by Janssen Neuroscience.